Before the James Show on WBAP, every day you hear one of the top, maybe top 5 radio shows in the country, the Dan Bongino Show. One of the producers working hard on that show is a guy named Jim Verdi. He's joining us on the James Show for a couple of reasons. Number one is I think the people that listen to WBAP would love to know your background. And then the next segment, we're going to talk about your book, which I already think is a hoot. I hadn't even finished it yet. But for the people who don't know your background and didn't know your connections to the area, because I didn't find out until this weekend that you're a local, Jim.
James, yeah, it was great to meet you, and thanks for having me. I appreciate this. Yes, I've been in Texas since 1981, and been on the radio here, either behind the scenes or on the radio for the last 35 years. So, yeah, I'm lucky enough to have been in this business for this long, and also to have been in one market for as long as I've been.
So give the guy listening sort of the 2-minute backstory on how you started in radio and made it all the way to the Dan Bongino Show.
Well, I was majoring in communications at UTA, and, when you're majoring in communications, you want to kind of get a start. So I took an internship at K-Love. And that was a great experience. Met some great people, learned from some legendary people like Chuck Brinkman, who was the program director over there, Hubcap Carter, God rest his soul.
When you were there, did they K-Love their oldies? Was that their thing when you were there?
You know it. You absolutely know they did. That's for sure.
Yeah, one of the two classic Dallas radio elements I remember from my childhood was that and the KVI helicopter. I always thought that was a brilliant name for a helicopter, the KVI helicopter. I mean, we don't have helicopters in radio anymore, but when we did, that was cool. All right, so how did you make it to the Dan Bongino Show?
Oh, boy. Well, I had worked again in town, and some of the WBAP listeners may remember Young Country. I was on Young Country for the entire run of that, and then worked on a talk station when they flipped that format.
That was my first job.
And then I actually worked in Arlington, right down the hall from WBAP at ESPN Radio. I was doing that. So, and I would talk to old Steve Lamb on a regular basis. And a bunch of the other folks that are over there.
Yeah, so Hal J and Steve were working here when you were next door, I guess, right?
Yes, that was one of my favorite memories, was coming into work one morning, and I got to work just at the same exact time as Hal had pulled up and Terry Dorsey had pulled up. And the three of us were walking into the building just real silently, and I kind of broke the tension and said, "What do you say we knock it off for the day, boys, and go grab some beers?" And I made both of them laugh. So that was one of my favorite radio moments. Two legends like that, So worked there for a while. Then 10 years at Radio Disney, writing and producing material for Radio Disney. And then when they shut that down, another local guy, Gary Reynolds, had asked me, "Hey, I need a fill-in for Michael Savage, if you could do that for like when the producer needs a vacation or whatever." And so I said, "Yeah, sure, I can do that from time to time." And then winds up, the executive producer was no longer there after 2 weeks, so they needed somebody to fill that in. And I took the job, and I was there for 7 years. And once that contract wasn't renewed, for whatever reasons, I'm not even sure the behind the scenes on that. But that's
you're talking about with Michael Savage.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Then that's when I got a call to say, "Hey, this was unfortunately after Rush Limbaugh died, a hero to me in this industry, and unofficially a mentor because I never got to meet the guy, but man, he meant a lot." And I was asked if when he died, they had signed Dan Bongino to take the spot. And I got a call to say, "Hey, would you like to produce the show?" And I absolutely wanted to do anything I could to jump at that chance to help out in any way I could to fill that spot, because I knew it was going to take a lot, and I just wanted to be a part of it to try and keep it as special as it always was.
So you work on the Dan Bongino Show, but you're still in DFW.
Yes. We have a studio over in Farmers Branch, and I connect with Dan in Florida. We are on Skype every day. so he can see me where I'm at. And then we connect it all up through Denver so everybody else can hear it all over the country. But yes, we run it right here out of the DFW area.
I did not know that, and I bet the guy listening to us right now didn't know it either. You already had a liking for the Dan Bongino Show. We just gave you a few more reasons to like it. We're going to continue with Jim Verdi next, because the reason I'm really having him on today is not just for his backstory. He wrote a book, and it has some of the behind-the-scenes explanations on what it's like to work on a big radio show like the Dan Bongino Show, but also, more importantly, it has some rules. This is something that most radio shows talk about. We should write a book with like all our rules in it. They actually did it. You probably heard the promos for the event that happened on Sunday. Jim Verdi was doing a book tour. We had an event at the he had an event at the Angelica Theater over at Mockingbird Station. And first off, that movie was incredible. I didn't know this existed. It's a movie from 2019. What was it called again? Mr.
Jones.
Yeah, Mr. Jones. So I'm familiar with the Walter Durante story. I did not know the Mr. Jones story. And so it's a period piece, and it's a historical drama, but how accurate was that? Is that 100% almost documentary level accuracy?
I mean, I think they took some license with it, in telling the story. They may have over-dramatized or over-dramatized some of what he had gone through. But in essence, it's definitely really what happened. He is the one who exposed Durante as a fraud, and basically lost his career over that, and eventually wound up dead because of exposing what he did.
So is this a book tour or a movie tour or both? Is this what you do at every stop?
No, this was just something that they called, and they wanted me to come on out there, and said they would set up a book signing as well. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it, because I had gone a couple of weeks before to Kash Patel's. Kash had debuted his movie in this festival, and I met Serena, the organizer over there, and then she called and said, why don't you come? We're doing a movie, and then we can do a book signing and talk about the state of media today, which is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's so corrupt.
Yeah, and so if people don't recognize the names I was throwing out there, Walter Durante was the Moscow bureau chief or whatever for the New York Times, and lied and lied and lied over a period of years and years and years during Stalin's rise, during Hitler's rise. Yeah, and got Pulitzer Prizes, got all kinds of awards, was lauded. And then some real journalists show up and try and get to the bottom of what's going on in Russia in the 1930s, and it goes just as poorly as it could possibly go. Now, why did you write this book, The Dan Bongino Show Survival Guide?
It's funny because just before the break, you had said we should write a book on our show about some of our rules and things like that. That's exactly the way it came about. We were talking about some of the inside stuff. I mean, you guys have the Ticket over there, and the Ticket is a legendary station here, and they came up with basically the P1s, and they also had. The P1s is it. It's the behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on, because they have all their inside jokes. We have inside stuff, too, and Dan has said, you need to write a book about some of the inside stuff that we have here on the show, and put the golden rules in it, put Dan's theories in it, and he just thought it was going to be some type of little pamphlet thing. He said, why don't you write it? I'll publish it. I'm like, okay. He thought it was going to be some little thing, but I wound up just kind of writing a book. It just kind of came out. And the funny thing was, when I sent him the manuscript originally to make sure everything was going to be okay with him, he calls me on a Saturday morning, which he never does. And he's like, Jim, you wrote a book. I'm like, yeah, I wrote a book. You asked me to write a book. He goes, no, but you wrote a real book. I'm like, yeah, I know I wrote a book. He said, it's good. I went, well, good. Thank God. So, and the rest is history from there. So that's what we did.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the utility in this book. I love the stories at the front and talking about, the radio experience and, dealing with the GM or convincing Dan to do the show and stuff like that. But let's talk about the golden rules, because I think these are going to be fluid. There's probably going to have to be future editions of this book. There will be some additions. There may be some subtractions out here, because I have a feeling some of these rules are going to be modified pretty quickly in the next 5 years. But Let's talk about the golden rules. Who's in charge of deciding what the golden rules of the show are?
These are all his. He's the one that comes up with them, and he started those on day one, and I just started keeping track of them and giving him numbers, and then we just kind of listed them out. But these are all from him. You have the first one, the initial one is "Don't Get Dead," and that's probably the most important one, because if you get dead, then the rest of the rules and everything else isn't going to do you any good, and your family's probably going to miss you terribly. So that's the first one.
You know, I loved how we start there, because one of the first things I tell people is, why don't you get in shape? Why don't you take good, if you want to change the world for the better, you want to do something for the cause, we need you healthy. We need you alert. We need you in the best condition possible. And we don't need you dead. We don't need you dying at 68 because you weigh 328 pounds. We need, that extra 10, 20 years that you would get if you were healthy. So I like how he started there, but I think the number 2 is one of the most important rules that not just for our listeners, but if the rest of the country could understand this, I think that would really grease the conversations a lot. Bongino golden rule number 2, we see liberals as people with bad ideas. Liberals see us as bad people with ideas. And that's important, because once you establish someone's a bad person, you don't even have to argue against their ideas. You don't argue the Social Security tax rate for Hitler. You just go fight Hitler.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's the thing. I mean, I laugh, and I shouldn't, because it's sad that it's come to this. But the reason that's a rule is because for years you've had a media that basically presented a leftist point of view. So for Republicans or conservatives to go on TV or radio or anything else, we had to craft our ideas. We had to be sure in our facts. We had to know exactly what we were talking about to defend our positions every time. So we were able to develop these ideas. The left never had to do that. They never had to have those skills, because they never were challenged. It was whatever they said was just believed.
Yeah, they weren't challenged by their professors. They weren't challenged by their teachers. They weren't challenged by their favorite musician or their favorite actor in an interview or their late night talk show host. Or they've never, a lot of them haven't been challenged by, the local media, the newspaper. Can I poke back, though? This isn't going to be a slobbering, loving interview.
Whatever. Yeah, I'm all for it.
I think you have a mistake here on golden rule number 4. It says there are Republicans that are really Democrats, but there are no Democrats that are really Republicans. Now, I'm not saying the spirit of this rule is wrong. You may need to change the wording, because you could say there are fewer Democrats that are really Republicans. And I use as my counterexample the mayor of Dallas. He has been a Democrat his whole life, but in the policy positions he's chosen since he's been mayor, it was 100% Republican down the line almost. He backing the cops. He was fussing about letting people out on low bail, and he seems to be concerned about balancing the budget and sort of fiscal conservatism. And so when he came out as a Republican, I wasn't surprised. And so I think that's a counterexample that may put a mark against golden rule number 4.
No, I think that's a fair point, but let me defend it by saying I think these are geared towards more of the federal government, which is kind of, we each have a concentration on our shows, and we concentrate more on the federal government than we do states or locals. I can find you examples in the state government as well. I mean, there's definitely people in the Texas legislature who you could are very, vague in what they believe, or a kind of amorphous to where they'll go to one side or the other side. So I think you're right in that sense, but I'm thinking from a federal point of view, and the reason that rule is there, if you look at what happens in the United States Congress, you're going to have Democrats that stick together like a block no matter what. And Republicans never do that.
All right, Jim, only got 30 seconds in the show. How do they get a copy of your book if they're interested?
Wherever you buy your books, Barnes & Nobles, you get them at Target, Walmart, online, at Amazon, wherever you want to do that.
All right, Jim Verdi, it's been an honor. Thank you for being on the James Show. Appreciate it. Now you can catch him on his work is on the Dan Bongino Show, which is heard right here on WBAP weekdays 11 to 2. It's my lead-in.